Sir, stand up, now. This seat is not for someone like you. If you don't leave on your own, we'll have security escort you off this aircraft. In front of the entire first-class cabin, Jack Sullivan, a single father in a worn jacket, was forced out of the VIP seat he had legally purchased so that famous CEO Olivia Harrington could take it. Nobody checked his ticket. Nobody questioned her. Jack simply stood and walked off the plane. 5 minutes later, the captain's announcement ordered every passenger off the aircraft. Denver International, 6:40 in the morning. The concourse smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, and the light through the west windows was still gray. Jack Sullivan stood at gate B42 with a canvas jacket folded over one arm, the cuffs worn pale at the seams, a leather bag at his feet that had been repaired twice at the strap. He was somewhere past 40, with a flat, unhurried way of looking at things that most people mistook for slowness. He had bought his ticket 9 weeks earlier on a Tuesday and had chosen the seat himself. He was not looking at the gate. He was looking at the jet bridge door and at the small placard beside it and at the time on the wall clock, and he wrote something in a notebook the size of a napkin. Then he closed it and put it in the inside pocket of the jacket, where it sat next to a laminated card he did not take out. Around him, passengers charged their phones and argued about upgrade lists. Nobody looked at him twice, which was the point. It was usually the point. The gate agent working the podium was a young woman named Grace Bennett, 4 months into the job, still checking every screen twice because nobody had yet taught her which checks were optional. Jack watched her run a boarding pass glance at the seat map and then glance back at it a second time before she released it. She scanned his pass and the light went green. "First class, sir. Seat 2A. Window on the left." "Thank you," Jack said. "You're running 4 minutes ahead of the posted boarding time." Grace blinked and looked at her monitor. He was right. She had started early because the podium supervisor had told her to keep the flow moving, and she had not thought about it as a deviation until a stranger in a repaired jacket had said the word posted like it meant something specific. She watched him walk down the jet bridge and did not know why the exchange stayed with her. Inside the cabin, the lead flight attendant was already at her station with a tablet in her hand. Danielle Brooks had 12 years with the airline and a promotion review scheduled for the 15th of the month, and she had been told more than once, and never in writing, that regional leadership evaluated first-class cabins on the feedback of the people who flew in them most. She had learned the arithmetic of that. 100 ordinary passengers could not do for her what one important one could. She glanced at Jack's boarding pass without reading the name, took in the jacket and the repaired bag, and offered a smile calibrated to about half of what she would give a suit. "2A is straight ahead. Can I hang that coat for you?" "I'll keep it," Jack said. He settled into the window seat, put the bag under the seat in front of him rather than in the bin, and did something almost nobody in first class does. He read the safety card. Then he looked up at the door seal, at the emergency lighting strip along the floor, at the placard above the exit, and each time his eyes stopped somewhere for a moment longer than a tourist's would. The notebook came out again for one line. Danielle noticed and filed it under nervous flyer. 12 rows behind in economy, an older man named Walter Denning eased himself into a middle seat with the careful choreography of a bad hip and a long connection, and asked for water. He had been traveling since the previous afternoon. Nobody made a note of him either. At 6:52, the concourse noise changed. It changed the way it does when a camera crew is somewhere near, except there was no camera crew. Olivia Harrington came up the jet bridge with a phone against her ear and a titanium case in her other hand, moving at a speed that assumed the space in front of her would clear. Behind her, half a step back, her assistant Marissa Kane carried 2 garment bags and a folder, and managed to look apologetic on her employer's behalf without ever quite apologizing. Olivia ran Harrington Group. She had been on the cover of 2 business magazines in the last year and had spoken at a conference in this city the night before, and she had a signing in Washington at 1 in the afternoon that had been moved twice. She had flown this route more times than most of the crew had worked it. She had also, for 8 years, sat in the same seat on it. 2A. Window left side forward of the wing out of the galley light. She read contracts there. It was a superstition that had hardened into a rule, and the airline had never once made her explain it, because for 8 years the system had simply given it to her. This morning the system had given her 2C. She saw it on her boarding pass at the top of the jet bridge, and she saw the reason for it 3 seconds after she stepped through the aircraft door. There was a man in her seat. He was wearing a jacket with worn cuffs, and he was reading the safety card. Olivia lowered the phone. "Marissa, look at that." Marissa looked and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and because she had learned that Olivia's questions in that register were not questions. Danielle came forward immediately the way you do when you recognize a face from a magazine cover in your own aisle. She greeted Olivia by name, without needing to check the manifest, took the garment bags from Marissa, and asked whether everything was to her satisfaction, which was the wrong question to ask that morning. 2A, Olivia said. "I'm in 2A. I've been in 2A on this flight since 2018. There's a man sitting in it." Danielle's eyes went to the boarding pass in Olivia's hand, and she read 2C, and she understood in one clean motion exactly what the next 4 minutes were going to cost her, and exactly what they might buy. "Let me take a look at that for you, Ms. Harrington." She walked up the aisle to Jack's row with the tablet held at chest height, and she smiled at him with the version of her smile that came out when she needed something. "Sir, I'm sorry there's been a system error with your seat assignment. It looks like you were double assigned. I'm going to need to move you." Jack closed the safety card and put it back in the pocket. "Which system?" The question landed oddly. Danielle had expected confusion or annoyance, not a question with a technical shape to it. "The seat map, sir. It happens sometimes with the overnight sync. My boarding pass says 2A. It was issued at the kiosk 50 minutes ago from the same seat map. If the sync had failed, the kiosk would have caught it." Jack's voice stayed level, unraised, almost mild. "Can you pull up the booking record and show me the assignment history? It'll be under the record locator." Danielle did not pull it up. She turned the tablet a few degrees away from him, which was the first small physical lie of the morning, and said that she wasn't able to show passengers internal records. "Then call the gate manager," Jack said. "I'd like the change documented before it's made." Behind her, Olivia had not sat down in 2C. She stood in the aisle with the titanium case still in her hand, and she said loud enough for the cabin that she had a signing in Washington, and that she was not going to spend the flight negotiating with someone over an error the airline had made. 2 men in the row across looked up. One of them took his phone out of his shirt pocket and rested it on his knee screen up and did not look at it again. Roger Whitfield arrived from the jet bridge in under 90 seconds, which was faster than he had moved for anything else that week. He was the gate manager for the B concourse that shift 17 years in, and he had a specific instinct that had served his career well and would end it before lunch, when a conflict involved someone with a magazine cover. The fastest path to no complaint was to give the magazine cover what it wanted and write the paperwork afterward. He came up the aisle with the gate radio still clipped to his shoulder, keyed open the way he always left it. He heard about 40 seconds of Danielle's version. He did not hear any of Jack's. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to gather your things." "On what basis?" "There's a duplicate assignment on 2A. We're reseating you. There's a seat available, and you'll be accommodated." "Where?" Whitfield glanced at Danielle's tablet. "We're working that out. So there's no seat yet," Jack said. "You're removing me from a seat I hold a valid boarding pass for before you have somewhere to put me on the basis of an error you haven't shown me any record of." He said it without heat, the way a man reads a number off a gauge. "I'd like the captain informed." That was the moment it stopped being about a chair. Danielle heard the captain and heard underneath it a passenger who knew the chain of authority on an aircraft, and instead of slowing down, she sped up, because slowing down now meant explaining to Olivia Harrington why she was being asked to sit in 2C. She leaned toward Whitfield and said quietly that the passenger was becoming difficult and that they were 4 minutes from door close. Whitfield straightened up. His voice changed into the flat register the airline trained into people for exactly this and that, had been used for the wrong purpose more times than anyone had ever counted. "Sir, stand up, now. This seat is not for someone like you. If you don't leave on your own, we'll have security escort you off this aircraft." The cabin went quiet in the specific way a cabin does when 40 people decide at once not to be involved. Someone in row 4 shifted to see better. The phone on the knee across the aisle was still screen up. Walter Denning, 12 rows back, could not see anything at all and only heard the word security. Jack looked at Whitfield for a moment. Then he looked at the name badge on his chest and read it and did not hurry. Then he turned and read Danielle's, which was pinned slightly crooked over the airline's silver wings. He did not write either of them down. He did not need to. "I'd like your employee numbers as well," he said. Whitfield's jaw tightened. "You can request that through customer relations." "All right." Jack stood. He did it without a sound of protest, which unsettled the cabin more than an argument would have. He lifted the leather bag by its repaired strap and folded the canvas jacket over his arm, and he took one step into the aisle and stopped, because from that angle standing, he could see over Danielle's shoulder to the tablet in her hands. She had turned it away from him at chest height. Standing, he was above it. The screen showed the seat map for the flight. Her thumb was on 2A, and the field beside it was open in edit mode, and the small gray line at the bottom of the record was already populating manual reassignment D. Brooks, 658. Above it in the row that had been there 10 minutes earlier and would be gone as soon as the record wrote was the original allocation, with his name against 2A and a booking timestamp, 9 weeks old, with no duplicate anywhere on the map. There was no system error. There never had been. He watched her thumb come down. The field closed. The record wrote. Jack's expression did not change. He looked at the timestamp for 1 second longer, the way he had looked at the door seal, and then he looked at the small clock in the corner of the tablet, and then at his own watch, and he saw that the tablet was running 11 seconds behind. Crew tablet synced to the station server. This one had drifted. He registered the offset without any idea yet how useful it would be. "Thank you," he said to Danielle. She had no idea what to do with that. So she said, "We'll get you taken care of, sir." Olivia was already moving past him into the row. She did not look at him as she passed. To her, the matter had been closed since the moment Whitfield arrived, and she settled into 2A with the titanium case flat on her knees and the phone back at her ear, and she said to whoever was on the line that the seat situation was handled. Marissa took 2C and busied herself with the folder. Jack walked up the aisle toward the door. Nobody stopped him. Danielle stepped aside to let him pass, and Whitfield fell in behind him with his hand, almost but not quite at Jack's elbow, escorting him the way you escort a problem you have already solved. At the aircraft door, Jack stopped and turned back. From there, he could see the whole first-class cabin, and the cabin could see him, and he was aware of exactly what it looked like, a man in a worn jacket being walked off a plane, while a woman from a magazine cover sat in his seat with a phone at her ear. He said only one thing, and he said it to Danielle, not to Olivia. "You just edited an official flight record in front of 40 witnesses." Then he went out through the door and up the jet bridge, and the sound of 40 people exhaling at once followed him for about 6 feet before the fuselage cut it off. In the cabin, a woman in row 3 said something quiet to her husband about how badly that had been handled. The man across the aisle turned his phone over and stopped the recording that had been running for 2 minutes and 19 seconds. Danielle went back to her station and closed the seat map and told herself with some success that the sync explanation would hold because it always had before. Whitfield walked ahead of Jack up the bridge, already composing the entry in his head. Passenger reseated due to duplicate assignment. Cooperative. Halfway up, Jack stopped walking. "Mr. Whitfield, sir, if you'll wait at the podium, we'll find you something. Before you write anything." Jack said, "I want you to think carefully about how you described the last 4 minutes." Whitfield laughed one short note of it, because the man was standing in a jet bridge with a bag held together by a repair and no leverage in the world. "Have a good morning, sir." He went ahead through the door into the concourse. Jack did not follow him immediately. He stood alone in the tunnel with the gray daylight coming through the seam at the top, and he took the small notebook out of the inside pocket of the canvas jacket. Beside it, still unseen by anyone on that aircraft, sat the laminated card he had not taken out all morning. He wrote 4 lines, a name, a second name, a timestamp of 6:58, and an 11-second offset. Then he closed the notebook, put it away, and walked out into the concourse toward the podium. It was 6:59. Whitfield did not let him leave. That was the first mistake of the second half of the morning, and it belonged entirely to Roger Whitfield. He put Jack at the mouth of the jet bridge 3 steps from the podium and told him to wait there while a seat was located, because a passenger standing in the concourse was a passenger who could walk to a customer service desk and start a complaint with a different set of employees. Held at the bridge, he was still inside Whitfield's jurisdiction. So Jack waited. He stood with the canvas jacket over his arm and the repaired bag at his feet close enough to the podium screen to read it, and he did not look impatient. And that was the second mistake, because a man who is not impatient is a man who is waiting for something. Whitfield worked the phone with his back half turned. He tried the same solution twice. Economy was full. The jump seats were crew only, and the next departure to Washington was not until 11:50. He kept saying the word accommodate into the receiver in the tone of a man building a record. He typed while he talked. Jack watched the podium screen from a 2-foot angle, which was enough. The entry Whitfield was composing read, "Passenger voluntarily relinquished 2A following duplicate assignment advisory. Reaccommodation in progress. No disruption." Not one word of it was true, and every word of it was now permanent. Grace Bennett had stopped scanning passes because there were no passes left to scan. She stood at the far end of the podium with her hands flat on the counter and a bad feeling she could not name. Whitfield's shoulder radio had been keyed open the whole time he was in the cabin, and the gate set behind her had carried every word of it into the empty boarding area. The flat voice, the word security, and the 3 words in the middle that she had heard so clearly, she had looked around to see whether anyone else had. Someone like you. Nobody had said anything about it, including her. She looked at her own terminal. She had a gate agent's read-only view of the seat map, and she was still new enough to check things nobody had told her to check. She opened the assignment log for 2A. There it was. 1 line. Manual reassignment D. Brooks, 6:58. No duplicate. No sync failure. No error code of any kind, because there had been no error. Grace did something then that she could not have explained if anyone had asked her. She took her phone out below the counter, framed the screen, and photographed it. Then she scrolled back 1 page and photographed the original booking record with Jack Sullivan's name against 2A and a timestamp 9 weeks old. She put the phone in her back pocket and went back to standing with her hands flat on the counter, and her heart was going hard enough that she was sure it showed. 3 steps away at the mouth of the jet bridge, Jack watched the whole thing without moving his head. He saw the elbow drop below the counter. He saw the shoulders square up afterward, too straight, the posture of somebody who has just done something and is waiting to be caught at it. He filed it and said nothing. Inside the aircraft, none of this existed. Olivia had the contract folder open on the tray table and the titanium case under the seat, and the phone against her ear again, and she was telling her Washington office that the signing at 1 o'clock was fine, that she would be wheels down by noon, that the morning had involved a minor seat issue that the airline had resolved. She used the word resolved twice. She had not thought about the man in the worn jacket since the moment he stepped out of the row, and she would not have been able to describe his face. Marissa in 2C had thought about it. She had thought about the phrase, "someone like you," for about 90 seconds. And then she had opened the folder and stopped, because thinking about it was not in her job description, and there was a signing at 1 o'clock. Danielle Brooks ran her pre-departure service. She poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and 1 orange juice, and she smiled at every face in the cabin, and the smiles were real because it was over. The seat map was closed. The passenger was gone. The most recognizable woman in first class had been made comfortable, and on the 15th of the month when her promotion review came around, that would be a line in her favor, and nobody would ever ask which seat Olivia Harrington had been sitting in or how she had gotten there. She told herself the sink explanation would hold. It had held before. It had held twice on this station in the last 6 months, and each of those had been a man in the wrong clothes who had gone quietly, and none of them had ever come back. The cabin door was still open. Departure was in 8 minutes. At exactly 7 o'clock, a man in a charcoal suit came up the jet bridge from the concourse side, with a laminated badge clipped to his breast pocket and a folded itinerary in his hand. Martin Caldwell had been the airline's regional operations executive for the Western System for 9 years. He was at Denver that morning for an unannounced station audit, the kind that involves standing at a gate for 20 minutes and writing 3 sentences about turnaround discipline, and he had picked Gate B42 because it was the closest one to the elevator. He came through the bridge door and stopped. Standing 3 steps from the podium, holding a canvas jacket and a leather bag with a repaired strap, was a man Caldwell had last seen across a conference table in Fort Worth at the head of a compliance review that had cost a regional carrier its operating certificate. The color went out of Caldwell's face in one motion. "Mr. Sullivan." Whitfield turned around with the phone still at his ear. He saw his regional executive standing in the jet bridge, saying a name he did not recognize to a passenger he had thrown off an aircraft 12 minutes earlier, and something in his stomach dropped to floor. Jack took the laminated card out of the inside pocket of the canvas jacket. He had carried it there since Fort Worth, and had not shown it to a single person in Denver that morning, and he held it up now at chest height, angled, so the podium could read it too. Federal Aviation Safety Inspector, unannounced compliance observation. His photograph, his name, and an authority line at the bottom that Whitfield read twice and still did not entirely believe. "I was on this flight as a passenger," Jack said. "I paid for the seat myself 9 weeks ago. That part was real." Whitfield's mouth opened and produced nothing. Caldwell recovered enough to ask what had happened, and Jack told him in the same flat register he had used inside the cabin, and it took less than 50 seconds because there was nothing complicated about it. A seat had been taken from a paying passenger to give to a preferred one. The system record had been altered by hand to justify it after the fact. He had watched the edit happen on the tablet screen while it was being made. Then he said the thing that neither man expected. "I'm not asking for the seat back." Caldwell stared at him. "Mr. Sullivan, we will absolutely reseat you in 2A. I'll have it done in 90 seconds. "You're not listening." Jack put the card back in his pocket. "The seat is the least important thing that happened here. 4 things need to happen now, and the aircraft does not move until they do." He counted them off with no particular emphasis, which made them worse. The flight's data record was to be locked immediately at the station and at the operations center with no further write access from any terminal on the concourse. The departure was suspended. The full edit history on the seat allocation table was to be preserved and mirrored, including every manual change made on the station in the previous 24 hours, not just the one on 2A. And legal and internal audit were to be summoned to the gate physically now, not by email. Whitfield found his voice and used it badly. "Sir, with respect, we're 140 passengers with a departure slot. Mr. Whitfield." Jack looked at him. 14 minutes ago you altered the assignment of a seat on a departing aircraft and did not amend the passenger manifest. The manifest that went to the flight deck and to operations puts a passenger named Sullivan in 2A. Sullivan is standing in the jet bridge. Harrington is in 2A. Harrington's manifest entry says 2C, and 2C is occupied by her assistant, who is on the manifest for a seat nobody is currently in. He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. The document that tells this airline who is physically on that aircraft does not match who is physically on that aircraft. That is not a customer service problem. That aircraft is not legal to close its door. Caldwell had already turned to the podium. He was a competent man who had made his career on knowing exactly which sentence ended a discussion, and Jack had just said it. He picked up the gate handset and called the flight deck directly. Captain Thomas Reyes listened for 9 seconds and pulled the departure himself. At 4 minutes past 7, 5 minutes after Jack Sullivan had walked off the aircraft, the cabin address system came on. Reyes did not soften it. He said that a discrepancy had been identified in the passenger manifest, that the flight's departure was suspended, and that all passengers were required to leave the aircraft immediately with their belongings and wait in the gate area for further instruction. The sound that came out of first class was not panic. It was the specific outrage of people who are never inconvenienced. Somebody demanded to know if it was a security issue. Danielle Brooks stood in the galley with a service tray in her hands and felt the floor tilt very slowly under her, because she was the only person in the cabin who already knew with total precision which discrepancy he meant. Olivia did not move at first. She stayed in 2A with the contract folder open and told the phone that she would call back, and then she asked Danielle in a voice that carried the length of the cabin whether the crew understood that she had a signing in Washington at 1 o'clock. "Ma'am, I need you to leave the aircraft." "That isn't an answer." Danielle's hands were not steady on the tray. "Ma'am, please." What Danielle did next was the thing that ended any argument about intent. She stepped into the forward galley, keyed her radio to the gate channel, and asked Whitfield in a low voice to clean up the entry on 2A before anyone pulled it. Whitfield had a supervisor's terminal and about 40 seconds of privacy at the far end of the podium, and he used them. He opened the allocation table and tried to amend the record. The right went through halfway. It overwrote the original booking line, the one carrying Jack Sullivan's name against 2A and the 9-week-old timestamp, and then the operations center lock landed on the table mid-transaction and froze everything where it stood. The falsified line survived. The original line did not. Neither of them knew that a gate agent 4 months into the job had photographed both of them 11 minutes before. They came up the jet bridge in a slow line, 140 of them, past a man in a worn canvas jacket, standing at the podium with an airline executive at his shoulder. Some of them recognized him. A woman from row 3 said quite clearly to nobody that she had known it the second it happened. The man who had recorded 2 minutes and 19 seconds on his phone stopped in front of Caldwell and asked who he should send the video to, and Caldwell gave him a card. Walter Denning came up last, slow on the hip, still carrying the cup of water he had been given 12 rows back, and he asked Grace Bennett whether he would make his connection, and Grace told him honestly that she did not know. Olivia came off the aircraft with the titanium case in her hand, and Marissa half a step behind, and she walked directly to the podium, and for the first time that morning she looked at Jack Sullivan's face. She saw the jacket, she saw the bag, she saw nothing else because there was nothing else to see, and the badge was back in his pocket. "You did this," she said, "over a chair." Jack looked at her for a moment. "No, ma'am, you did this over a chair." The investigation started at the gate in public at 12 minutes past 7, and it did not stop for the next hour and 40 minutes. Eleanor Pierce came down from the airline's regional legal office on the mezzanine with 2 associates and a laptop, and she did not sit down once. Internal audit came from the operations center in the C concourse and set up at the end of the podium counter, and within 8 minutes they had the mirrored allocation table on a screen that 4 people could see at the same time. The falsified line was there. Manual reassignment D, Brooks, 6:58. No duplicate. No sync error. No system flag of any kind. Where the original booking should have been, there was a partial write and a lock timestamp. Called went gray. Without the original allocation, the record showed a reassignment from nothing to nothing, and Danielle's account of a duplicate could not be disproved from the airline's own system. Grace Bennett came around the end of the podium with her phone already out of her back pocket, and she said, before anyone asked her anything, that she had photographed both records at 7 o'clock, and that she understood she was not permitted to use a phone on an operations terminal. Audit put the photograph on the screen next to the damaged table. Jack Sullivan's name. 2A. 9 weeks old. No duplicate anywhere on the map. Nobody said anything to Grace. Pierce wrote her name down. Danielle Brooks was brought off the aircraft and asked first whether she had received a system advisory of a duplicate assignment on 2A. She said yes. Audit turned the screen toward her and asked her to point to it. She looked at the screen for a long moment, and then she said that she may have been mistaken about the advisory. Pierce asked her who had instructed her to make the change. Nobody instructed me. Then whose decision was it? Danielle's answer came out smaller than she intended. Mine. Then Jack said the only thing he said during the entire investigation. Check the clock drift on her tablet before you accept that timestamp. Audit checked. The crew tablet had drifted 11 seconds behind the station server, and the write it had produced carried the tablet's clock, not the server's. Aligned against the true station time, the record on 2A had been created 43 seconds after the concourse camera showed Roger Whitfield ordering Jack Sullivan out of the seat, which meant the advisory story was not merely unsupported. It was impossible. The record had not caused the removal. The record had been manufactured to explain a removal that had already happened. Whitfield did worse. He was shown his own gate log entry voluntarily relinquished 2A beside the recording from the passenger in row 3, in which his voice said clearly and at volume that the seat was not for someone like Jack Sullivan, and that security would remove him. He said that he had relied on the lead flight attendant's report. He was asked whether he had verified it. He said that at 4 minutes to door close, there had not been time. He was then shown the terminal log of his own attempted amendment at 4 minutes past 7. He stopped talking after that. Then Audit ran the 24-hour mirror Jack had asked for and widened it, and the room changed temperature. There were 9 manual seat changes on the station. 4 had no error code, no advisory, and no supporting note. 2 of them carried the same employee identifier. 1 was a flight out of Denver in the spring, and the affected passenger had filed a complaint that had been closed with a voucher and no investigation, because the complaint had been routed to the gate manager on duty, and the gate manager on duty had been Roger Whitfield. It had happened before. It had been happening. Nobody had ever looked, because nobody who had been moved had ever had the standing to make anybody look. 50 feet away, in a row of gate chairs with the case across her knees, Olivia Harrington was on the phone with her general counsel. She had recovered completely by then. She had run the numbers in her head the way she ran every number, and the arithmetic was simple and had never once failed her. Harrington Group flew 1,900 segments a year on this carrier. The corporate contract came up for renewal in October. She was not a passenger to them. She was a line item with 8 figures next to it, and 8 figures had a way of making mornings like this one dissolve. I didn't touch anything, she told her counsel. Their employee made a change. That's their exposure, not mine. And frankly, if they want to have a conversation about October, they can have it with you. Marissa, sitting beside her, watched Eleanor Pierce cross the concourse with the laptop under her arm and understood something her employer did not, which was that Pierce had not looked in Olivia's direction one time in 90 minutes, and that this was not deference. By 10 minutes to 9, there was nothing left to determine. Caldwell stood at the end of the counter with his hands in his pockets and said to no one in particular that this was a seat dispute. Eleanor Pierce closed the laptop. "No," she said. "A seat dispute is 2 passengers and a boarding pass. What we have is falsification of an official flight record, an inaccurate manifest on a departing aircraft, a false managerial log entry, an attempt to destroy the evidence of all 3, and a pattern. If this stops being an internal matter, it doesn't stop at 2 employees. It goes to the certificate." Nobody in the group said anything for a while, because the thing that had been true at 6:58, that a man in a worn jacket could be lifted out of his own seat, and no record would ever show, it was still true of every other passenger in the terminal. And now it was written down, mirrored, locked, and impossible for anyone to bury. At 9 o'clock, Caldwell asked Jack whether he wanted the findings handled quietly. He asked it in the reasonable voice men use when they are offering something they believe is generous. The airline would settle it internally. 2 employees would be dealt with. There would be a letter of apology, a refund, a lifetime status upgrade, and no press. It was by the standards of the industry a serious response. Jack said he wanted the opposite. He wanted the findings read out at the gate in front of the passengers, who were still sitting there, because every one of them had watched the first half and had a right to the second. The gate area had 140 people in it, and by then a few dozen more who had drifted over from B40 and B44. Eleanor Pierce stood at the podium microphone with the laptop closed under her arm, and Caldwell stood beside her, and Jack Sullivan stood off to the side with the canvas jacket over his arm, where he had been standing for most of 2 hours. He was the one who spoke first, and he spoke for less than 3 minutes. "I want to be clear about something before you hear the report, because I think most of you have the wrong idea about why this flight was stopped. It wasn't stopped because I lost a seat. I want to say that plainly. If a gate manager had come down that aisle at 6:58 and told me the airline had made a mistake and asked me to move, I would have moved. I've moved before. Losing the seat is an inconvenience. It is not a reason to hold 140 people on the ground for 2 hours, and if that's what you think happened here, then this morning was a waste of your time and mine. Here is what actually happened. An employee of this airline opened the official seat allocation record for this flight and changed it by hand with no error to correct and no authorization to do it, because a passenger with a recognizable name wanted something. Then a manager signed a log entry saying I had given the seat up voluntarily. Then, when it started coming apart, that same manager went back into the table and tried to erase the line that proved the seat had ever been mine. You should understand what that record is. The altered file went forward as the passenger manifest, and the manifest is the document that tells this airline and the people who come looking afterward exactly who is on board that aircraft. It is not paperwork. It is the answer to the only question that matters on the worst day this industry ever has. If it can be edited at a gate podium to make one important passenger comfortable, then it is not a record. It is a suggestion, and this is the part I want you to take with you. They did not do it because I was difficult. They did it because I looked like someone it would be safe to do it to. That was the whole calculation. Wrong jacket, wrong bag, nobody waiting on the other end who would make noise. I happened to be someone who could stop it. Almost nobody is. The next passenger in that seat won't be, and the one after that won't be, and if they can rewrite my file this morning, to please a famous name, they can rewrite anybody's on any flight, for any reason, and none of you would ever know it happened. That is why the aircraft did not move. Nobody applauded. It was not that kind of silence. Pierce read the findings after that in the dry voice of someone who has decided that facts are more damaging without help, and she read only what the crowd had not already watched happen. The alteration on 2A had been timed by the tablet's own drifted clock, and aligned against station time it had been written 43 seconds after the removal it claimed to justify. An audit of manual seat changes at the Denver station over the preceding 6 months had found 4 alterations with no supporting error. 2 of them under the same employee identifier, and 1 prior displaced passenger whose written complaint had been closed with a travel voucher by the same gate manager it concerned. The audit was being extended to every station in the Western system that afternoon. It had happened before. It had been closed by the man who did it. And it would have happened this morning and every morning after, and no passenger would ever have seen a record of any of it. Danielle Brooks was suspended from duty at the gate in front of the cabin she had served 2 hours earlier. She handed over her tablet and her crew badge to Caldwell, and she did not argue, and she did not look at anybody. 4 days later, after the review, her employment was terminated. She never made the promotion review on the 15th. What she said in her final interview was that she had believed the seat map was a courtesy the airline extended to important people, and that she had believed it because in 12 years, nobody had ever told her it was anything else. Roger Whitfield was removed from his position that same morning for abuse of authority, falsification of a station log, attempted alteration of a locked record, and the improper closure of a passenger complaint concerning his own conduct. His file went to the airline's corporate compliance office, and because a federal inspector's findings had already been entered, it went to the regulator as well. He asked Caldwell on his way out through the service corridor whether the whole thing was really about a seat. Caldwell told him it had never been about a seat, and that he had been told so at 7 o'clock, and had laughed. Captain Thomas Reyes gave his statement at 9:30 and asked one question at the end of it, which was whether the manifest he had been handed that morning would have been the manifest used if the aircraft had gone down over Kansas. Pierce told him yes. Reyes said that was all he needed to know and signed. Olivia Harrington was still on the phone when Pierce came to find her. She stood up when she saw her coming, which she had not done for anyone that morning, and she started with October. She had the number ready. 1,900 segments a year, an 8-figure corporate agreement, a renewal in 10 weeks. She said the words long relationship and proportionate response, and she said them well, because she had said versions of them in harder rooms than an airport gate. Pierce listened to all of it, and then answered in about 40 seconds. Harrington Group's corporate account privileges were suspended pending review. Olivia's own preferred passenger status was revoked outright, along with every priority the airline attached to it: boarding waitlist and reaccommodation. Her request for seat 2A and her presence in it had been documented as the proximate cause of an employee falsifying an official flight record, and that documentation was now part of a federal compliance finding, which meant it existed in a place the airline could not reach, and neither could she. Any future request from her or from anyone at her company that touched crew procedure or seat allocation would be refused at the point of contact in writing with a copy to compliance. Then, Pierce said the sentence that actually landed. "Ms. Harrington, the contract isn't leverage this morning. If we were seen to soften this, because of what your company spends with us, that fact would be part of the finding too. You've stopped being an asset to this negotiation. You're a liability in it." Olivia did not answer. By noon, the passengered video from row 3 had 2 million views. By that afternoon, her board had scheduled a call she had not requested, and a partner in Washington had moved the 1 o'clock signing to a date that was never set. She would spend the following week explaining in rooms full of people who had previously agreed with her before she finished speaking that she had not personally altered anything which was true, and which nobody found to be the point. The last thing Jack asked for, he asked for at the podium, with Caldwell and Pierce both standing there, and he asked for it as an inspector, not as a passenger. The airline was to rebuild its seat dispute procedure from the floor up. Manual alteration of a seat allocation record was to require a logged error code and a second authorization from someone not physically present at the gate. Any passenger removed from a purchased seat was to receive the reason in writing before the removal, not after. Complaints were never again to be closed by the employee whose conduct they concerned. and the practice of extending unrecorded courtesy to wealthy or famous passengers at the expense of documented allocations was to be prohibited outright in the operations manual in language a gate agent could read and understand in one pass. Caldwell said it would take months. Jack said that was fine, and that he would be back to check, and that the next time nobody would know he was coming either. Then he did one more thing, and it was the only part of the morning that surprised anybody. He asked for Grace Bennett. She came around the end of the podium with her hands at her sides, absolutely certain she was about to be disciplined for the phone, which was the thing she had been telling herself for 2 hours. "You took those photographs at 7 o'clock, Jack said. "What made you open that log?" Grace's face went hot. "Nothing made me. Nobody asked me to. I heard what Mr. Whitfield said to you over the open radio, and I didn't say anything. And then I wanted to know if the duplicate was real. Before you knew who I was. I didn't know who you were until Mr. Caldwell said your name." Jack turned to Caldwell. "Your entire case died at 4 minutes past 7. Your gate manager overwrote the original booking line, and the lock caught him halfway. There is no version of this file inside your company that proves the seat was ever mine. The only reason it exists at all is that a gate agent with 4 months on the job and no authority documented 2 managers above her at a moment when she had every reason to keep her head down." He looked back at Grace. "That's the one quality this business can't train into people. I'd like her name put forward for the Leadership Development Program." Pierce wrote it down. Caldwell said he would sponsor it himself. Grace stood there and did not say thank you because her throat had closed, and Jack did not appear to expect it. The replacement aircraft went out at 11:50 from Gate B31. It was a smaller airframe than the morning departure, with 8 seats forward instead of 16, and operations filled them by original booking sequence with no priority applied, because priority was the thing that had broken the station in the first place. Caldwell walked Jack down personally and made sure of the boarding order, and the seat map showed 2A against the name Sullivan, with the original booking timestamp from 9 weeks earlier, restored from the audit mirror and locked exactly as it had been before, 6:58 that morning. Jack got to the aircraft door and stopped, because a few feet ahead of him, moving slowly down the aisle, was an older man with a bad hip and the same paper cup he had been carrying since the first flight. Walter Denning had been awake for something over 26 hours by then, and was seated in a middle row in the back, and he was not complaining about it to anyone, which was somehow the thing that decided it. Jack turned to the flight attendant working the forward galley, a woman he had never met, and asked how a passenger properly initiated a voluntary seat exchange. She checked and told him both passengers had to consent, the crew had to record it, and the change had to be entered in the system with the reason field completed, so the manifest matched the cabin. "Then let's do it that way," Jack said. "All of it. I don't want anything on this flight moving without a record." It took 4 minutes. Walter was asked whether he consented, and said twice that he did not want to put anybody out. The crew entered it. The reason field read voluntary exchange, both parties consenting crew witnessed. The manifest updated. Jack read the confirmation on the tablet screen himself, which the flight attendant offered without being asked, and he nodded once. Then he carried the leather bag with the repaired strap down the aisle to the middle seat in the back, and he sat down in it, and he put the canvas jacket across his knees. Olivia Harrington was 2 rows behind him. Her preferred status was gone, her corporate account was suspended, and on a smaller aircraft with 8 forward seats assigned by booking sequence. There had been nothing at the front of the cabin for a passenger with no priority left. Marissa had taken a later flight entirely. Olivia had watched the whole exchange from the aisle holding the titanium case, and she had understood something on about the 3rd minute of it that had never once occurred to her in 8 years of sitting in 2A. The man had gotten his seat back. He had gotten it back with a federal finding behind it and an airline executive standing at his shoulder, and he had held it for 90 seconds before giving it to a stranger with a bad hip who had not asked for it and did not want to be trouble. She had spent the morning insisting on a chair. He had spent the morning insisting on a rule, and then he had given away the chair. Somewhere over Kansas, she got up and walked forward and stopped at his row. Jack looked up. "I want to ask you something," she said. "This morning at the podium, you could have told me who you were. You had the badge in your pocket the whole time." "I could have. Why didn't you?" He thought about it for a moment. "Because if I'd shown you the badge, you would have apologized to the badge. You'd have gone home certain that you'd made a mistake about one particular man, and that it was bad luck, and that everything else you did this morning was normal." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted you to see what it looks like when there's nothing in the pocket. That's what it looks like for everybody else." Olivia did not have an answer for that. She went back to her seat and sat with the case on her knees and did not open it for the rest of the flight. And for the first time in her adult life, she understood that the thing that had made 140 people go quiet at that gate had not been his authority because they had not known about his authority when they went quiet. It had not been money, and it had not been a name. It had been the fact that a man who could have taken everything back had asked instead that the rules apply to him the same way he was demanding they apply to her. The flight landed in Washington at 5:30 in the afternoon. Walter Denning slept the whole in seat 2A. Nobody moved him. Nobody asked him to justify being there. There was a record of exactly how he had come to be in that seat, complete with the reason and the consent and the name of the crew member who had witnessed it, and it would still be there in a year, and anyone with cause to look could find it. That was the whole point. A society is not measured by how it treats the people with power to protect themselves. It is measured by what it does to the people who have none on an ordinary morning when they are quiet, and when nobody is expected to ever check.